startcommerce.com, and in today's tutorial I'm going to share with you how to track Verisign's monthly top popular keywords using DomainScope API, PHP, and MySQL. So let's get started. So one of the first things is that if you go to DomainScope.com, which is offered by Verisign, they basically offer the domain name trends, which are basically keyword trends for recently registered domains in .com as well as .net. Obviously, here you can see that you can go in and you can set the timeline to 7 days, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, or a custom setting of your own. That being said, one of the things, obviously, with the tool here now, you can see that you can select multiple keywords or whatever the keywords here that they have. But one of the things is that that information obviously stays or remains here on the site. And so Verisign actually used to, or once provided, I believe they stopped somewhere after September 2019, but essentially they offered a keyword a report that basically gave like the top 10 keywords for recently registered domain names, both in the .com and .net extension. So that being said, they no longer offer that report. Well, what I want to show you today is how you use the DomainScope, use the API here to then go and retrieve data and put that data into a database. So I am running on XAMPP. So if you go to ApacheFriends.org, I'm running XAMPP version 7.1.26 for OS. So for Mac, you can find it also for Windows, and then go ahead and install that. I'm not going to walk through installing that. They do actually a tremendous job in terms of how-to guides. But then what you'll want to open up is the MyPHP admin. So go ahead and click there and it'll open something that looks much like this. Now I've already created the database, which I've named it DomainScope, and then I've given the table pop keywords, and then I've given those the appropriate columns, which we'll discuss here in a minute. So if you wanted to, excuse me, you could come in and essentially, if you wanted to create that table, you could basically take this code that I've highlighted here and use this code to automatically create your table. Or you could basically use, let's see here. Yeah, you could use PHP My Admin, go to new, you could type in the domain name and then select what collation you want it to be. Typically, it's going to be the UTF-8 _ general _ CI, and that is case insensitive. And so you would name in, whatever your database is, and then make the appropriate columns accordingly. Now, I'm going to hop back over to the DomainScope, and let's say you click the API, which then opens you up to this page of their API documentation. Currently it is 2.1 documentation. They give so if you click these links, they'll take you to various sections of the same page to basically walk you through what the API features are, how you get API keys, which are associated with your profile page, and you'll need that key. It also talks about rate limiting. So the default rate limit is that you can do 20 requests per minute. And once you hit that rate limit, then, ultimately what they do is basically they'll throttle or suspend that account for a set period of time. That being said, there are 7 methods which you can actually use to programmatically access Verisign Verisign DomainScope's data, and those are pending delete search, domain name registration history, domain name lookup, top trending keywords, top popular keywords, and popular keywords. And below, if you were to click here, they basically take you to each method, which is a get method. And so the one that we're looking at today is the top popular keywords, because that's the report that we want to start creating on a monthly basis. So if you click it, it'll drop down, it'll give a description of the method itself. So it's a get method. It gives the URL that you'll need to access, as well as any URL parameters, any query string parameters, any required and optional parameters. With this call, we see that we have a start date, an end date, and a number of samples. If those are left blank, you'll notice here the start date will default to yesterday if no dates are provided. The default samples are limited to 10. So in any case, if it is a successful call, and they show you here in example what that URL should look like. So in this case, you get a code 200 okay with a return JSON response object, which is this object here. So what I've done is created column names in the database for keyword total count, the com count, and the net count, which the total count is comprised of adding the com and net counts together to achieve the total count. So that being said, I've created the one basically keyword total count, com count, net count. And so if we look back and we go to pop keywords, now you see I have the keyword, the total count, the com count, the net count, and the date. And I added the date in there because I basically, since I'm going to be running this script monthly, I want to know for what month this information correlates to, or relates to rather. And so I added the date for that. Outside of that, if we look at the structure of this table for pop keywords, you'll notice the same thing. There's a primary ID key that is basically an unsigned field that is auto incremented, meaning that every time we add a row, it'll basically increment that ID. So 1, 2, 3, 4 in sequential order, you get the picture. Next up is a keyword, and it has a varchar of 255 characters. And I mean, that's pretty much what you need to know in terms of, that given column. Obviously, the rest are integer fields. The date is date time, and then the create date, which I added in there for myself just so that I know if it's updated, I know when it was updated, which is basically timestamp, and then on current update, it'll do the current timestamp. So that's it in a nutshell. As long as you set everything up to appear and look very much like what you see here in terms of your table structure, then all should be well. So that being said, what we hope to achieve is basically this output, and this is what my script looks like, and what it rather the output of the script and not the script itself. So it basically gives me the time period for which all of this is occurring. So it's on February the 1st, 2020 through February 02 the 29th, 2020. Now it is leap year, so that's why it's 29th and not 28th. But in most instances, the script is already run, and it's basically showing that these keywords, home, shop, group, life, online, tech, design, services, health, and boy, were all updated in the database because I ran the script multiple times already. If it was an initial execution, then this line here would read home was, instead of updated, it would say inserted. So that being said, if we look at the current popular keywords for that same timeline, we see home, shop, group, life, online, tech, design, services, health, boy. That's the same list of keywords that we basically now use the script to pull. So let's hop into the script. So to begin with, what you'll want to make sure is that we need to be able to connect to the database. So using XAMPP, our database host is localhost. Our database user is root, and by default, root does not have a password. So we just basically put 2 parentheses there, and nothing's in between there, obviously. The database that we named was DomainScope. Then we use a bit of PHP to use the MySQL or MySQL underscore connect method to then pass these parameters or variables in as arguments, and then we create a variable called db just in the event that we need to pull that into a function. We then move forward with making sure that, hey, if we don't connect, we need to just stop or basically throw an error. And so we just say, hey, if my SQLi connect error, so if the error occurs and no connection is made, then we want to echo to the web browser display that says failed to connect to MySQL. And then we basically put the error there. So that's that. Now our database connection has been made. So a couple of things that we talked through with the top popular keywords API was that you need to have a start date and an end date. Here I put 2 hard-coded dates so that you can just see the date and how it should look. You could uncomment those by deleting that, and now that is made available. I'm just going to comment those out because I don't like using hard-coded dates. What I preferred was to use dynamic dates. The dynamic dates are a lot easier because then I can keep the same script without even having to touch it from month to month. And it knows if I run this on the 5th day of every month, it'll go back to the previous month by using the start date, and it'll figure out, give me the first day of the previous month, as well as the end day or last day of previous month. And so I can dynamically run the script and always know that I'm getting whatever the previous month was without having to go in and change it. And so I do that because I use or automate these scripts by using cron jobs. Next up, what we need to make sure is, now that we set the dynamic dates, we now need to actually append those variables into creating an API URL request, which was found in the documentation. So it was this bit of information that was shown for that get method for top popular keywords. That said, what I do is come in and I define the URL. I put the main URL there, and then I'll use the same variable, but then I'll concatenate, essentially using the period equals. So this will now be added to that. So think of all of this in yellow as one long string that then takes the date and places them as start date equals whatever the previous first day of the previous month, and then the end date variable will be the last day of the previous month. So now our URL is set. Next up, we need to set the key credentials. The key credentials are your API credentials. And so if we go back to this page here to the API, and so now you can actually see that if we scroll back up here, you'll need an API key, and you can get that from your profile page. And it basically gives you everything that you need to know about that. So we'll bounce back into the code. So once you get your API key, you'll want to replace all the X's that are there that I'm highlighting with your key. And then the next thing, which I won't spend too much time here, which you can look up if you just Google PHP curl, but we're going to need to make a curl call to be able to make this API request. And so the one thing to note here is that it uses the URL. So it uses the curl opt underscore URL setting, and we pass to it the URL that we created back up here. So this value. So the URL equals everything in the yellow that's in this line, and we pass it there. And then we want to make sure that the curl opt underscore custom request is set to get. Obviously, it could be many other options, but for this one, we're using get. Then we execute the curl call here in line 54. So the line that I've highlighted, but basically setting a result variable and then doing the curl execute, which is basically everything that the ch variable has housed, which is ultimately all the different curl options, and it executes that. Then right after that, immediately, we close the curl connection just so that we don't leave it open. So next up is making sure that since we know that the data response is a JSON object, what we'll do is we'll decode the JSON object so that we can actually parse it or iterate through it using PHP as an array. So we use the JSON underscore decode method, which is built into PHP, we pass to it the result of what we executed up here in the curl call. That data gets passed there and is now decoded and associated with the DN variable. Now let's go ahead and prepare for the output for the screen display. So pretty much the code that you see now, all the way from line 71 all the way down to 108, this is the code that actually produces this output here. So you'll likely see some lines of familiarity here in terms of looking at all of this. So let's jump back to the code real quick. Obviously, like I said, starting off line 71, you see it says time period, and then we insert the start date through end date. So jumping back, there's that first line there highlighted. Next up, because the data is an actual array, basically a decoded JSON array, PHP array, we have to do a for each statement. And so we essentially say for each, keyword, then basically we go through and we go, okay, now each keyword is split into an array. And so what I want to show you real quick, if you're not familiar, is essentially we do the first for each for this, which then it contains basically the first array value or key pair value and then the second. And so that means that it has two samples that are in there, but we first need to iterate through the first one, then we'll iterate through the second. So that's what we're doing with this line here. Line 73 is iterating and it's covering this first line. Well, then we say for each keyword within there, we need to break it out as its own separate keyword. So for each keyword as each keyword, now for it, it's basically going through and going, how many of these do we have in there? So if we had 2, then it just flow through there twice. So once we get inside of each keyword, then we basically want to set push a new key pair value inside of that key. And so we want to add the start date. And so that start date lets me know that, hey, during the month of February, this keyword had this many total accounts. So that's why we use the start date there. Obviously, we echo the keyword, which if you look here, then you see we've echoed home. And then what we do is basically we check. And so we run a function called check keyword data, and I'll go over the functions here after we go through this code. They're pretty easy, but they'll make a lot of sense. So the first thing that we do is check if the keyword already exists in the given month. So if we didn't do this, then what we would wind up with is we would always insert the code or insert the keyword data into the database, and you would have multiple rows for the same data, which doesn't make sense. You only want one row, one keyword row per that given month. And so to make it make sense, if you will, what we don't want to see is, let's say that this keyword Bob, you don't want to see Bob have the same date. So there should only be one Bob that has January 1st, 2020. You don't want to see multiple rows of Bob with the same date. There can be multiple rows with the keyword Bob, but they better have a different date. So that's why we perform this check. If the check comes back and the check does exist, that hey, the keyword exists for that given day, for that given keyword in given month, then what we basically do is just say that we're going to update that keyword, and it updates that keyword data. So it updates that one row that is just like itself. And then basically, if that checks out, then we go, okay, hey, this keyword was updated, or if it wasn't updated, then we basically say the keyword was not updated. Now, if the checks and the keyword does not exist, then essentially what happens is we then insert the keyword, doing the same thing. And so if the keyword exists, then the keyword was inserted. If it was not inserted, then the keyword was not inserted. Now let's hop through these quick 3 functions, which are pretty quick and easy. So there's insert keyword data, and we pass to it an array of data that then we break out into their own variables. So again, we're wanting to track the keyword, the total count, the com count, the net count, the date. All of those are a part of the DN array that we pass. And then if you remember, we made the DB a global variable. And so now we just put in there global DB so that we can actually access that database connection to be able to insert when we're running the DB query. And so there's the insert into pop keywords, and then we basically state which columns that we have data for and then put those associated values there. Same thing with update, with the exception of it's update. And so instead of insert, it has update there, and then we want to set values. So we properly align whatever the column is to the appropriate update value. And same thing for the check keyword data. It does the same thing, except it uses select instead of update or insert. And so we make a selection and we choose the primary ID from the pop keywords, where the keyword equals the keyword and the date is the check date. So this is how we say, hey, is there a Bob that is available with the date of January 1st, 2020? If it exists, then we basically return true. If not, we've already returned false as the default. So if none of this code works out below, it'll return false, which meaning that, hey, we didn't find a keyword in there. And so it might be a lot. You'll probably have to watch the video a couple times, but like I said, I mean, it's pretty easy to get. And so go through this video a number of times and go through and learn, Google the many different things that you see here. And there's enough that's out there that should be able to help you, gain a good grasp. And then once you're ready, you can actually access that script. So save the file, put it to a web server, and then access that script using a web page, and then it'll look something like this. On your initial try, it'll be home was inserted, or whatever the keyword is. Keyword was inserted. If you run it again, then it'll likely say keyword was updated. And so I really hope that this helps you make sense. I know that for many people, the Verisign DomainScope monthly, trending keywords that were contained in recent.com.net domain registrations for a given month it was very popular. I mean, I definitely enjoyed it. It certainly kind of gave insight to the industry and just kind of what was going on. And so, for instance, at this current time of the recording, the coronavirus is very popular. And so by going and looking, I can actually see that there have been thousands of names that are registered around virus, COVID, coronavirus, and the like, and even just Corona itself. So it gives a good print, or can give a good footprint for what types of names are popular, or what types of keywords rather are popular that people have been registering. And so that being said, since they don't send out the monthly statement anymore, or the monthly email, then this is a better way. Or like I said, you can always go and visit DomainScope here and do your own, but it doesn't necessarily give you the option to export. In my opinion, I'd take the script and create the script yourself, put it on a web server with cron job to run like on the 5th of every month. And, from there, I'm like, shoot, man, I'd put it on the run on the 5th of every month, or, you probably do it on the 2nd of every month, but store the data so that you can actually go back through time and just see what's been popular. That's something that I plan on doing just for myself purposely, so I can make data-driven decisions behind some of my domain investing. So If you have questions or you run into any technical issues, please feel free to drop comments or leave me questions here below the video, as well as please subscribe to the Kickstart Commerce YouTube channel, where I drop a video every Wednesday afternoon. And then last but not least, head on over to kickstartcommerce.com, and I talk about a number of things, from search marketing, WordPress tips and tricks, as well as primarily I speak about domain name investing and just digital strategies in general. So feel free to sign up for our daily newsletter, where I shared many different tips and tricks about the disciplines of digital strategy to help grow your business. So let me know if you have any questions. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and we'll see you back here next week.